tell me in a sentence who you are.
Nobody.
Charles Miles Manson, born on November the 12th, 1934, was an American criminal and cult leader in the late 1960s. He would form what would become known as the Manson family, and Manson's followers committed a series of 9 murders at 4 locations on July and August 1969. In 1971, he was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people, all of which were carried out by the group members on his instructions. Manson was also convicted of first-degree murder for 2 other deaths, and he was originally sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted to life with the possibility of parole after California invalidated the state's death penalty statute in 1972. He served out his life sentence at California State Prison in Corcoran and died at the age of 83 on November the 19th, 2017, after suffering from cardiac arrest.
Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary, 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree. Design or intent to effect the death of said Lisa Levy.
My chance to talk to the press.
Contrary to section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jury...
Theodore Robert Bundy was an American serial killer, kidnapper, rapist, burglar and necrophile who assaulted and murdered numerous young women and girls during the 1970s and possibly even earlier. Shortly before his execution, and after more than a decade of denials, he confessed to 30 homicides that he committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. However, the true victim count is unknown, and it could be a lot higher. He would typically approach women in public places, feigning injury or disability, or impersonating an authority figure before overpowering and assaulting them in secluded locations. He sometimes revisited secondary crime scenes for hours at a time, grooming and performing sexual acts upon the victims' decomposing corpses until putrefaction and destruction by wild animals made any further interactions impossible. He also decapitated at least 12 of his victims and kept some of the severed heads in his apartment as mementos. Bundy first went to jail in 1975 for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became suspect in a long list of unsolved homicides in multiple states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, he engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed more assaults, including 3 murders before his recapture in Florida in 1978. Bundy was found guilty and convicted of these murders and received 3 death sentences in 2 different trials. He was executed in the electric chair on January the 24th, 1989.
I started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex, and it just got worse and worse.
Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who committed the rape, murders and dismemberment of 17 men and boys from 1978 to 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia and cannibalism. And although he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder and a psychotic disorder, he was found legally sane at his trial. Convicted of 15 out of 16 murders he had committed in Wisconsin, Dahmer was sentenced to 15 life sentences on 15th of February 1992 and was later sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment for an additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. On November the 28th, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution.
Que su dinero o nunca ha tenido vinculación con el narcotráfico.
Siempre he asegurado que mi dinero no tiene vínculos con el narcotráfico.
Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was a Colombian drug lord and narco-terrorist. His cartel supplied an estimated 80% of cocaine smuggled into the United States at the height of his career, turning over $21.9 billion a year in personal income. He was often called the King of Cocaine and was the wealthiest criminal in history, with an estimated net worth of $30 billion by the early 1990s, making him one of the richest men in the world in his prime. He studied briefly at university, but left without a degree, and began to engage in criminal activities, such as selling contraband cigarettes, fake lottery tickets, and also participating in motor vehicle thefts. He then started to work for smugglers, often kidnapping and holding people for ransoms before distributing powder cocaine by himself. By 1980, it was estimated he was smuggling in 70 to 80 tons of cocaine from Colombia to America monthly. And in 1993, Escobar was shot and killed in his hometown by Colombian National Police 1 day after his 44th birthday.
Now, you got to take my word for it, but there's a slug in this gun. Well, I want one shot to my head. One shot to Renee's. Are you ready, Renee?
I don't think I want to play.
Are you ready? You don't want to play. Bad luck.
Mark Brandon Chopper Reed was an Australian convicted criminal, gang member and author. Reed wrote a series of semi-autobiographical fictional crime novels, as well as children's books. The 2000 film Chopper being based on his life. Reed was born on November the 17th, 1945, to a former Army and Korean War veteran father and a mother who was a devout Seventh-day Adventist. By the age of 14, he had been placed in several mental institutions, where he later claimed he underwent electroshock therapy. While young, Reed was an accomplished street fighter and began his criminal careers by robbing drug dealers and later kidnapping and torturing members of the criminal underworld, often using a blowtorch or bolt cutters to remove the toes of victims as an incentive for them to produce enough money so that Reed would leave them alive. He spent only 13 months outside of prison between the ages of 20 to 38, having been convicted of crimes such as armed robbery, firearm offences, assault, arson, impersonating a police officer and kidnapping. In April 2012, Reed was diagnosed with liver cancer and underwent surgery in July 2012 to remove tumours from his liver. But in late 2013, he was admitted to Melbourne Private Hospital in failing health and died shortly of the illness on 9th of October 2013, aged 58.
Of all your criminal acts, how many jobs did you get away with?
Oh, I would say a pretty big percentage, because you get caught once, and unless you're dumb enough to have cases taken into consideration, you don't get caught for the ones that you did.
Ronald Arthur Biggs was an English thief known for his role in the Great Train Robbery of 1963, for his escape from prison in 1965, and for living as a fugitive for 36 years. On the night of the Great Train Robbery, the gang stopped the mail train from Glasgow to London in the early hours of the 8th of August, which was Biggs' 34th birthday. Unloading 120 of the 128 mail bags from the train, they returned to their hideout, and various sources say they robbed 2.6 million, which is the equivalent to 49 million in 2017. Biggs' share was 147,000, equivalent to 2.8 million in 2018, and after an accomplice failed to carry out his instructions to burn down Leatherslade Farm and to destroy evidence, Biggs' fingerprints were found on a ketchup bottle by Metropolitan Police, and he was jailed in 1964 with 9 other gang members. Yet Biggs only served 15 months before escaping from Wandsworth Prison on the 8th of July 1965, scaling the wall with a rope ladder and dropping onto a waiting removal van. For many years he remained on the run before being found in Brazil, where the UK government made a formal request to the Brazilian government for Biggs' extradition, which they rejected. However, Biggs returned to the UK on a private jet paid for by the Sun newspaper on the 7th of May 2001, where he was immediately arrested and re-imprisoned. Biggs would be released on the 6th of August 2009, 2 days before his 80th birthday on compassionate grounds. He died in a nursing home in December 2013. Edward Theodore Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, was an American murderer and body snatcher. His crimes committed around his hometown of Plainfield, Wisconsin, gathered widespread notoriety after authorities discovered that Gein had exhumed corpses from local graveyards and fashioned trophies and keepsakes from their bones and skin, such as belts and chairs. He was also the inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films. Gein confessed to killing 2 women, tavern owner Mary Hogan in 1954, and a Plainfield hardware store owner Bernice Warden in 1957. Gein was initially unfit to stand trial and confined to a mental health facility in 1968. He was found guilty but legally insane of the murder of Warden and was remanded to psychiatric institutions. He died at Mendota Mental Health Institute of cancer-induced liver and respiratory failure at the age of 77 on July 26, 1984. He is now buried next to his family in the Plainfield Cemetery in a now unmarked grave.
See, what you got to remember is this. I am not, or never have been, a danger to the public. All crimes out there are very, very minimal. More dangerousness is inside, not outside.
Michael Gordon Peterson, better known as Charles Bronson, is an English criminal who has been referred to by the British press as the self-styled most violent prisoner in Britain and Britain's most notorious prisoner. He has spent periods detained in the Rampton, Broadmoor and Ashworth high-security psychiatric hospitals. Originating as a petty criminal, he was sentenced to 7 years for armed robbery in 1974. Upon his release, he began a bare-knuckle boxing career in the East End of London. His promoter thought he needed a more suitable name and suggested he changed it to Charles Bronson after the American actor. He was returned to prison for planning another robbery and continues to be a violent inmate, taking numerous hostages, resulting in him being imprisoned for life. Bronson has written many books about his experiences and famous prisoners that he has met throughout his incarceration, and also cultivated a reputation as an outsider artist. In 2014, he changed his name to Charles Salvador in mark of his respect for one of his favourite artists, Salvador Dali.
Few crimes have caused the outrage and revulsion of the Moors murders, and the tabloid newspapers have ensured that the images of the 60s hadn't been allowed to fade away. Hindley, who lured children to their deaths at the hands of her lover Ian Brady.
The Moors murders were carried out by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley between July 1963 and October 1965 in and around Manchester, England. The victims were 5 children, aged between 10 and 17. Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans. At least 4 of them had been sexually assaulted. 2 victims were discovered in graves dug on Saddleworth Moor, and a 3rd grave was also discovered there in 1987, more than 20 years after Brady and Hindley's trial. The body of the 4th victim, Keith Bennett, is also expected to be buried there, but despite searches, his body remains undiscovered. Myra Hindley died on the 15th of November 2002, aged 60. With Ian Brady dying 15 years later on the 15th of May 2017.
How much has this trial cost you?
It's cost us roughly £8,000.
And how do you feel about that?
I don't suppose anyone likes the idea of spending that money for no reason at all, you know.
Ronald Ronnie Cray and Reginald Reggie Cray were identical twin brothers who were English gangsters and the foremost perpetrators of organised crime in the East End of London during the 1950s and 1960s. With their gang, The Firm, the Crays were involved in armed robberies, arson, protection rackets, assaults and murder. As West End nightclub owners, they mixed with politicians and prominent entertainers such as Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland. They were arrested on the 8th of May 1968 and convicted in 1969. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment. Ronnie remained in Broadmoor Hospital until his death on the 17th of March 1995. And Reggie was released from prison on compassionate grounds in August 2000, only 8.5 weeks before his death from cancer.